The glittering facade of modern celebrity and royal prestige often projects an illusion of flawless perfection, a seamless tapestry of privilege, wealth, and effortless grace that commands global fascination. For generations, the public has looked upon the lives of the world's most prominent figures with a mixture of envy and awe, captivated by the relentless machinery of public relations that ensures every smile is perfectly timed and every appearance flawlessly orchestrated. Yet, beneath this carefully curated exterior, far away from the blinding camera flashes and the adoring crowds, lies a much darker, deeply unvarnished reality that few ever truly get to witness. It is a world defined by immense, unrelenting pressure, where the expectations of an entire society weigh heavily on the shoulders of individuals who are fundamentally as vulnerable and fragile as anyone else. For decades, the unwritten rule of elite society was to maintain a stoic silence, to endure the heaviest emotional burdens behind closed doors, and never allow the public to see the cracks in the armor. To show vulnerability was often equated with a catastrophic failure of duty, an unforgivable betrayal of the institutional strength that these individuals were born or chosen to represent. Consequently, generations of prominent public figures have suffered in absolute isolation, masking their deepest anxieties and profound psychological wounds behind a mask of rigid decorum and unyielding public duty. This culture of silence, while preserving the grand illusion of untouchable strength, left an immense trail of unspoken trauma, creating a deep chasm between the public persona and the private human experience. As we navigate a rapidly evolving cultural landscape, this rigid paradigm is finally beginning to shatter under the weight of a new, profound wave of human honesty. More and more, the individuals who once seemed completely beyond the reach of ordinary human suffering are choosing to step out from behind the velvet ropes and share their deepest, most raw internal battles. This shift marks a historical turning point in how we view the intersection of immense fame and the universal human condition, proving that no amount of privilege can shield a person from the internal storms of the human mind. If you find these deep explorations of human stories and behind-the-scenes realities compelling, please take a brief moment to subscribe to our channel and join our growing community, as your support allows us to continue bringing you these in-depth narratives from around the world. The ongoing global conversation surrounding psychological well-being has found an unexpected and incredibly powerful catalyst in a man who spent his entire life embedded within one of the oldest and most strictly regulated institutions on Earth. His journey from a deeply traumatized child, constantly under the microscope of global media scrutiny, to a fiercely independent advocate for emotional healing represents a massive departure from traditional expectations. For years, the world watched him grow up under the most tragic circumstances imaginable, witnessing a young boy navigating a devastating loss, while the entire planet looked on with an intense, often invasive curiosity. The images of that young prince, standing tall amidst an overwhelming sea of public grief, became permanently etched into the collective global memory, symbolizing a profound tragedy that would shape the rest of his life in ways the public could only begin to guess. As he transitioned into adulthood, the external world continued to see a charismatic, energetic young man dedicated to his duties and seemingly coping well with the extraordinary demands of his high-profile position. He was celebrated for his approachability, his genuine connection with ordinary people, and his apparent ability to handle the relentless pressure of a life completely devoid of privacy. However, what lay beneath that energetic and cheerful exterior was a turbulent, escalating storm of severe anxiety, overwhelming panic, and a profound sense of isolation that was completely invisible to the outside world. The expectation to perform, to show up at high-profile events with a confident smile while the internal world was completely collapsing, created an unbearable psychological tension that threatened to overwhelm his entire existence. Every public appearance became a battleground against his own nervous system, an agonizing exercise in hiding the physiological manifestations of deep emotional trauma from millions of watching eyes. The sheer physical toll of this constant state of high alert was staggering, manifesting as sudden bursts of overwhelming heat, a racing heart that felt entirely uncontrollable, and a profound sense of claustrophobia even in vast open spaces. This state of constant fight or flight was not an occasional occurrence, but rather a persistent daily reality that turned the simplest tasks into monumental hurdles of psychological endurance. The world remained completely oblivious to this agonizing struggle, continuing to consume the media narrative of a privileged young man living a charmed life, entirely unaware of the deep, festering wounds that were slowly driving him toward a breaking point. This massive disconnect between external perception and internal reality highlights the profound isolation that often accompanies extreme public visibility, where one can be surrounded by thousands of cheering people and yet feel completely alone in the universe. The turning point did not come overnight, nor was it the result of a sudden, easy epiphany, but rather a slow, painful realization that the path he was on was entirely unsustainable. The catalyst for this profound transformation was the entry of a new presence into his life, a relationship that would fundamentally challenge his perspective on survival, duty, and emotional honesty. This bond forced him to confront the reality that running away from past trauma through temporary distractions and artificial coping mechanisms would ultimately destroy his future and alienate the people he cared about most. It became terrifyingly clear that to save his future and build a genuine life, he would have to do something that felt entirely counterintuitive to everything he had been taught since childhood, which was to admit defeat, drop the armor, and actively seek professional help. This decision, which required a completely different kind of courage than the physical bravery he had demonstrated throughout his life, set him on a trajectory of profound self-discovery and radical life changes that would eventually shock the entire world. It led to a monumental decision to step back from the entire structure that had defined his existence since birth, a choice that reverberated across the globe and ignited an endless storm of debate, criticism, and fascination. By prioritizing personal healing over institutional expectations, he sent a clear and unmistakable message to the world that emotional survival and mental well-being must always take precedence, regardless of the cost or the magnitude of the legacy left behind. Now, this ongoing evolution has culminated in a massive, collaborative media project designed to bring these exact struggles out of the shadows and into the mainstream global conversation. Partnering with one of the most influential and respected media figures in history, he has embarked on a mission to dismantle the deep-seated stigma that still surrounds emotional suffering in today's society. This new platform serves as a powerful sanctuary for vulnerable storytelling, bringing together an extraordinary array of globally recognized figures who are all willing to share their most private, agonizing battles with the world. By aligning his own deeply personal narrative with the stories of other cultural icons and ordinary individuals alike, he is attempting to construct a universal framework for understanding mental health that transcends status, wealth, and background. The project represents the ultimate fulfillment of a promise to use his unique global platform not for traditional institutional representation, but for raw, unfiltered advocacy that aims to change how humanity views its own collective vulnerabilities. The massive global resonance of this groundbreaking initiative lies in its unapologetic, deeply intimate focus on the specific anatomical and psychological realities of severe mental distress, moving far beyond vague platitudes to expose the raw, physiological terror of a mind at war with itself. When the Duke of Sussex stepped before the cameras for this new Apple TV Plus documentary series titled The Me You Can't See, he shattered decades of royal protocol not by merely mentioning his struggles, but by detailing the agonizing physical manifestations of his severe anxiety and panic attacks. For years, before every major public appearance, a wave of intense panic would wash over him, causing his body temperature to spike by 2 or 3 degrees compared to everyone else in the room, leaving him pouring with sweat and trapped in a brutal, inescapable state of fight or flight before he had even crossed the threshold of his home. This was not simple nervousness or stage fright, but a profound, debilitating neurological response rooted in a childhood defined by sudden, earth-shattering trauma and the relentless, invasive gaze of the global paparazzi. He spoke candidly about how the unresolved grief surrounding the tragic 1997 death of his mother, Princess Diana, festered beneath the surface for over 2 decades, eventually manifesting as an overwhelming sense of helplessness that drove him to seek temporary, destructive escapes. In his late 20s and early 30s, a period the world assumed was filled with privileged fun and military heroism, the prince was actually trapped in a dark cycle, turning to alcohol and substances to mask the constant, humming pain of his daily reality. Drinking a week's worth of alcohol in a single Friday or Saturday night, not for pleasure, but to numb the terrifying sensations that threatened to crush his sanity. This deep internal fracturing became completely unmanageable as the public demands on his time grew, creating a terrifying paradox where the more the world demanded his presence, the more his mind demanded absolute isolation and escape. The turning point that ultimately saved him from this spiraling descent was not an institutional intervention or a sudden burst of royal duty, but the profound, transformative power of a genuine human connection that refused to accept the mask he had worn for 32 years. Meeting and falling deeply in love with Meghan Markle forced the prince to look directly into the mirror and confront the shattered pieces of his psychological well-being, as he quickly realized that his unhealed trauma was actively threatening the future of this relationship. He recalled a pivotal moment of conflict where he reacted with an intense, misplaced anger that made it undeniably clear that if he did not actively seek professional therapy and commit to fixing himself, he was going to lose the woman he could vividly see spending the rest of his entire life with. It was this profound fear of loss, rather than any desire to break royal tradition, that finally pushed him to sit in a therapist's chair for the very first time. Embarking on a grueling 4-year journey of intense psychological exploration that completely transformed his understanding of his own mind. Through this dedicated therapeutic process, he began to unpack the deep-seated anger, the paralyzing fear, and the profound sense of institutional entrapment that had dictated his behavior for his entire adult life, slowly learning to retrain his brain and break the ancient, destructive cycles of emotional suppression. This deeply personal awakening directly inspired the creation of the docuseries, which he co-produced alongside media titan Oprah Winfrey, establishing a massive global platform where high-profile figures and ordinary citizens could share their rawest vulnerabilities without judgment or shame. The series meticulously interweaves Harry's personal revelations with the deeply moving stories of other global icons who have faced their own distinct psychological abysses, creating a brilliant, multifaceted tapestry of human resilience that completely redefines how modern society views mental illness. Among the most striking and powerful segments is the raw, unvarnished testimony of pop icon Lady Gaga, who opens up with devastating honesty about the long-term psychological fallout of a severe assault she suffered early in her career. Detailing her ongoing battle with severe fibromyalgia and chronic pain that doctors eventually traced back to her deep, unresolved mental trauma. Her story beautifully mirrors Harry's own experiences, proving with absolute clarity that the human body remembers and physically stores psychological trauma long after the mind tries to bury it away from public view. The series also features incredibly vulnerable conversations with Hollywood legend Glenn Close, who discusses her family's long, agonizing battle with severe genetic mental illness, and professional basketball star DeMar DeRozan, who bravely steps forward to discuss his lifelong struggle with debilitating depression, shattering the toxic stereotype of the unyielding, emotionless male athlete. By placing these monumental cultural figures side by side with everyday people from diverse backgrounds, including a young Syrian refugee navigating severe post-traumatic stress disorder and an ordinary family coping with the catastrophic loss of a child, the project successfully strips away the illusion that wealth, fame, or status can somehow immunize a human being against emotional suffering. The narrative tension within the series builds relentlessly as each participant describes the precise moment their carefully constructed public facade completely crumbled, forcing them to choose between continued agonizing compliance with societal expectations or a radical, terrifying leap toward authentic healing. For Prince Harry, that leap required a complete and total restructuring of his entire universe, leading directly to the historic, earth-shattering decision to officially step down as a senior working member of the British royal family. A move that sent shockwaves through global institutions and ignited an unprecedented, highly polarizing international media storm. This monumental departure, which the couple first elaborated on during their historic tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey earlier that year, was presented not as a petulant rejection of duty, but as a literal matter of life and death. An act of absolute survival designed to protect his new family from the exact same institutional pressures and media harassment that had ultimately claimed his mother's life. The sheer weight of this decision and the subsequent public backlash only added to the intense emotional stakes of the project, transforming it from a simple documentary into a radical living manifesto for personal freedom and mental autonomy. As the second part of this profound narrative unfolds, the viewer is forced to confront the immense, staggering cost of choosing authenticity in a world that demands rigid conformity. Witnessing the incredible friction that occurs when an individual decides to value their own psychological health above the ancient traditions of an empire. The depth of Harry's transformation becomes undeniable as he describes the profound peace and stability he has finally managed to cultivate in his new life in California, far removed from the suffocating, highly regulated environment of his youth, where he now focuses entirely on raising his son, Archie, and building an independent legacy centered around global empathy and healing. He emphasizes with immense passion that he has learned vastly more about himself, his emotions, and the true nature of human psychological resilience in the last 4 years of intense therapy than he did in the entire 32 years of his life preceding it, offering a powerful, living testament to the fact that it is never too late to confront one's demons and reclaim control over one's own destiny. This profound realization serves as the emotional anchor for the entire project, shifting the conversation away from a tragic examination of past suffering and toward an incredibly empowering, forward-looking celebration of human vulnerability as the ultimate form of strength. By laying bare his own deepest flaws, his past dependencies, and the terrifying moments of panic that once ruled his existence, the prince deliberately strips himself of royal mystique to meet the viewer as an equal, offering his story as a humble roadmap for anyone currently trapped in the dark, suffocating confines of their own unaddressed mental trauma. The culmination of this profound psychological journey shifts the focus from individual survival to a broader global imperative, offering a revolutionary framework for how modern society must understand and treat emotional suffering. Prince Harry, by completely laying bare his own vulnerabilities and the intimate mechanics of his healing process, leverages his unique position to challenge the deeply entrenched societal stigmas that have forced millions to suffer in silence for generations. The ultimate message of the docuseries, encapsulated in his powerful declaration that seeking professional help is not a sign of weakness but an ultimate sign of strength, serves as a direct rallying cry for a world emerging from unprecedented collective trauma. This perspective represents a massive cultural shift away from the traditional, rigid notions of stoicism and emotional suppression that have historically dominated elite circles and broader societies alike, replacing them with a new philosophy centered entirely on radical authenticity and mutual empathy. To fully comprehend the weight of this transformation, it is essential to look deeply at the context of his upbringing and the profound historical forces that shaped his reality from the very moment of his birth in September 1984. As the younger son of Charles, Prince of Wales, and Diana, Princess of Wales, Harry was born directly into an ancient, highly structured institution where personal desires and emotional expressions were strictly secondary to the overarching demands of state duty and public image. His childhood was defined by an extraordinary duality, caught between the rigid, formal expectations of traditional court life and the vibrant, deeply human and unconventional approach to parenting championed by his mother. Princess Diana famously sought to shield her sons from the suffocating constraints of their royal status, taking them to ordinary fast food restaurants, amusement parks, and, crucially, to homeless shelters and clinics, introducing them to the raw realities of human suffering and instilled in them a deep sense of empathy. However, this fragile balance was permanently shattered in August 1997 when Diana was tragically killed in a high-speed car crash in Paris while being pursued by paparazzi, a catastrophic event that occurred when Harry was just 12 years old. The image of the young prince walking silently behind his mother's coffin through the crowded streets of London, watched by billions of grieving spectators across the globe, became a defining historical moment, symbolizing a level of public, forced grief that no child should ever have to endure. This profound trauma was immediately met with the traditional institutional expectation to carry on without a public display of emotion. A demand that forced the young prince to completely lock away his grief, anger, and confusion behind a stoic facade for over 2 decades. This severe emotional suppression laid the groundwork for the debilitating panic attacks and severe anxiety that would plague his 20s and 30s, turning his mandatory public appearances into terrifying exercises in physiological and psychological endurance. His subsequent decade-long career in the British Armed Forces, which included 2 operational tours of duty in Afghanistan, provided a temporary sanctuary of camaraderie and clear purpose, allowing him to step outside his royal identity and be judged solely on his merits as a soldier and officer. Yet, even the structure of military life could not permanently suppress the simmering trauma of his childhood, and upon leaving active service, the reality of his high-profile existence returned with an even greater, more suffocating intensity. The entry of Meghan Markle into his life in 2016 acts as the definitive catalyst for his psychological awakening, as the American actress brought a fresh, entirely different cultural perspective that valued emotional transparency and active mental health advocacy. The intense, relentless media scrutiny and toxic commentary that immediately surrounded their relationship heavily mirrored the exact same pressures that had plagued Princess Diana, triggering Harry's deep-seated post-traumatic stress and forcing him to recognize that the old coping mechanisms of denial and numbing were completely failing. The decision to embark on extensive cognitive therapy, including specialized treatments like eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, commonly known as EMDR, allowed him to systematically unpack the traumatic memories of his childhood and process the profound grief he had carried in isolation for so long. This grueling, transformative inner work provided him with the psychological clarity and resilience required to make the historic decision in early 2020 to step back as senior working royals, relocating across the Atlantic to California to establish a completely independent life dedicated to family and impactful global advocacy. By establishing the Archewell Foundation, Harry and Meghan have channeled their personal experiences into a structured, far-reaching platform that funds and supports innovative mental health initiatives, digital safety campaigns, and community resilience projects worldwide. The Me You Can't See stands as a monumental manifestation of this mission, co-created with Oprah Winfrey, whose own legendary career has been defined by elevating diverse human stories and dismantling complex social taboos. Winfrey's participation adds an immense layer of authority and depth to the project, drawing on her decades of experience as a master interviewer to create a uniquely safe space where participants feel empowered to share their most guarded truths. The global impact of this series extends far beyond the realm of celebrity commentary, serving as an educational blueprint that normalizes the pursuit of mental well-being across all sectors of society. By highlighting the stories of individuals like Lady Gaga, Glenn Close, and DeMar DeRozan alongside ordinary citizens, the narrative effectively democratizes the conversation around mental health, demonstrating with absolute clarity that psychological struggles are a universal human experience that ignores boundaries of wealth, fame, or social standing. The series systematically dismantles the harmful myth that mental illness is a personal failure or a lack of willpower, reframing it instead as a complex health issue that requires professional care, community support, and systemic compassion. In a modern world increasingly defined by digital isolation, relentless societal pressures, and collective anxieties, this call for emotional honesty and systemic change has never been more vital or timely. Prince Harry's journey from a traumatized, silent prince to a vocal, fiercely independent champion of global mental health stands as a powerful testament to the capacity for human growth and reclamation. His story proves that it is entirely possible to break free from the heaviest